Hello, my name is Greg Williams, and I will be today's host for our webinar, 4 Steps to Becoming an eLearning Pro with Tom Kuhlmann. Let me take this opportunity to tell you briefly about the UMBC, also known as the University of Maryland at Baltimore County. UMBC is a mid-sized public university located in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. It has been recognized by the U.S. News and World Report as the #1 top up-and-coming university in the United States for the last 2 years in a row. Today's webinar is brought to you by UMBC's Instructional Systems Development online graduate program. We offer an online master's degree in instructional design and several online graduate certificates. The program was established in 1968 and remains one of the most well-respected instructional design programs in higher education. For those of you who may be interested, UMBC also offers training in Articulate through the UMBC Training Center. For more information on upcoming classes, please visit the UMBC Training Center website. Let me cover a few administrative details before we get started. I know these are always exciting, but I think they'll be helpful. As participants, you will have the ability to ask questions by using the question dialog box. Since we have a very large number of attendees today, we will do our very best to address every question, but we cannot guarantee that every question will get a prompt response, so please be patient. We will be pausing for questions several times at about 15 minutes past the hour, 30 minutes past the hour, and 45 minutes past the hour. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be made available to you after the event. Additionally, our presenter, Tom Kuhlmann, has indicated he will make his slides available to you. Lastly, if you have any technical issues, our webinar hosts, GoToWebinar, said the best thing to do is to call them. The number is 800-263-6317. That's 800-263-6317. The number could also be found in the email you received reminding you of today's program. Now, let's get on to our speaker for today's presentation. Tom Kuhlmann is the author and host of the Rapid eLearning blog. He has over 15 years experience in the training industry, where he has developed hundreds of hours of e-learning and managed e-learning projects at Capital One, Washington Mutual, and Weyerhaeuser. Tom has a master's degree in education technology from Pepperdine, where he researched how to cultivate communities of practice through development of personal expertise. Currently, Tom is the Vice President for Articulate's user community that focuses on building passionate community of rapid e-learning developers. On a personal note, I've seen Tom present at the eLearning Guild, and I'm a big fan of his and a reader of his weekly blog. I really like Tom's simple, down-to-earth approach. It seems to resonate with many people's real-world experiences. I think he really relates well to those of us who sometimes struggle to do more with less. Tom, are you out there?
I am there. Thanks for the nice welcome and intro.
Well, it's well-deserved, and what I'm going to do is give you controls of the presentation. So in a minute, you should have control, and then you can do the driving.
All right, so here's my screen. Hopefully you can all see it. Let me set this up a little here. And what I want to do is I'll give you a few resources here, and then I have some additional resources that you can use as we get further into the presentation. So a lot of people know me through the Rapid eLearning blog. If you're doing e-learning, you could go ahead and subscribe to that or go visit the blog site if you'd like to. I try to keep it really generic and focused on just basic e-learning tips. So even if you're not an Articulate user, you probably find some value out of it. And then if you have any questions, like as Greg was saying, there's going to be a lot of questions probably generated from this, and we can't get to all of them. So if you have questions, feel free to email me or contact me through Twitter. I always tell people about half of what I do on Twitter might be interesting and about half is just goofy. So if you only follow half or every other tweet, then you'll probably be okay. And then the link below that, the bit.ly link, that'll have my presentation slides on there, and then some additional links and resources and tutorials that are kind of related to what I'll talk about. And so you could go there. Now with the bit.ly site, it is case sensitive, so they're all lowercase. And then I'll provide this at the end of the presentation as well. So let's go ahead and move on. And as Greg was saying, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them in the question panel, and then they'll collect them, and then we'll stop every so often to kind of address some of those. So what I want to do is kind of frame everything in what I call the rapid e-learning story. And this is kind of is evolved for me as I've gone out and talked to people. It's kind of related a little to my own experience, and then I found as I'm out there talking to people, it's kind of a common story. And essentially it works like this. So you're working in an organization. A lot of times people I find who are in the training side of things were subject matter experts that were really good at explaining stuff, and then they became trainers through time just because they were good explainers. And then as technology evolved, the organization says, okay, now you're going to be our e-learning person. So we're going to go out and buy a tool, and you have all this content that the company's already been using, and now we want to convert that, put it online. So it's kind of that first step for a lot of people, and that typically resonates with people when I talk, because most people I find kind of fall into that process as well. And then somewhere in the process, everybody says, hey, these things all kind of look like PowerPoint slides. What can we do to make them look better so they don't look like PowerPoint courses and actually look more like e-learning courses? And so that's that second step. And then the third step is they look great. How do we actually make them better learning experiences? How do we make them interactive? So that's kind of what I've seen as I talk to people. It's kind of that typical evolution of their own skills in their own organizations. And it's actually not a bad framework to think about how to get started. If you're just getting started, or if you're trying to bring your organization up to speed with e-learning, it's really not a bad way to kind of lay out the development of or the evolution of your own organization, or even your own skills and development. So we'll look at that a little today. The first thing is, how do I convert this course? So typically, we've got all these PowerPoint files, and how do I get this online? And so what we'll do here is talk a little about some basic things that you can do to take your courses from this kind of basic PowerPoint stuff or things that you've been using in class, and bring that up to something that's a little more like an e-learning course. And then I think the key objectives in this part of the evolution, it's really not that you're going to build the world's best e-learning at this point, but it's that you're going to develop some consistency, some production processes, and then you're also going to learn to use the tools, because getting to a point where you can build highly interactive, engaging learning, a lot of that is dependent on your fluency with the tools that you have. So I would say this first stage is develop some consistency and then learn to use the tools, and then you'll be able to expand on your skill set later on. So this is kind of typical of what you get. I just kind of mocked this up, but this really isn't too far-fetched. We've all seen courses or slides that look like this. This actually came from an idea from a slides that I saw. So hopefully if you submitted something that looked like this, I'm sorry if you submit it to me, because I kind of used this idea here. But the challenge with this is, and this is kind of typical of what we see when you're, especially if you're doing a PowerPoint-based e-learning, is you have this environment where you can put anything on the screen. So what happens is anything gets put on the screen. And so a lot of times we've got 20 million fonts on there. There's all sorts of images on there, and then colors. We use some template that we think looks pretty. We put that on there. We've got our branding issues we have to deal with in the organization. So we end up with a slide that's kind of like this, or a screen that looks like this, and we're not quite sure even where to start looking. So your eyes jumping all over the place. There's really nothing that guides the flow of information. So at this first stage, it's how do we get from this to something that's maybe a little bit more like this. So this isn't necessarily earth-shattering here. You're not going to win any e-learning awards with this type of screen. But as you can see, if we go backwards here, this, you're not even quite sure what you're supposed to be looking at. Here you've got something that's consistent. You've got a header that is clear that it's a header. You've got your steps marked off 1 through 4. Even the graphic that you're using, while it doesn't really add any real value to the content, you have a single graphic. The colors work, and it kind of fits the content. So how do you get to something like this? So let's think about basic course design first. So you're at a point today, and you want to train people or give them some information that gets them to a point tomorrow. So that's kind of the essence of your e-learning course. So we've got something, everybody's here, and now we want to get them somewhere else. So the first thing is, okay, what do you want them to do? That kind of becomes the basis of your objectives, right? So you can develop some objectives once you understand what you want them to do with this course. And then the next step is, how do I know they got there? And that's your basis for an assessment. So when you build a course, you're kind of taking from one point to the next, and then so you have objectives to get there, and then you have to have some sort of process to understand if they actually got to that point. So that kind of is the essence of an e-learning course. It's obviously a lot more complex than that, but you have objectives, you do your course, and then you assess whether or not people met those objectives. So once you understand that kind of course structure, you also know that each course is going to have screens. When it's a computer screen, there's really only so much you can do with the screen. So you can begin to pre-think or templatize, if that's a word. You could create some templates or some structure that you can apply to your courses to help build some consistency. So you know that somewhere in the process there's a welcome process in your course, or welcome screen. Welcome to Safety 101, blah, blah, blah. Then you're going to have some sort of instructions. You're going to have some sort of way to indicate what the objectives of the course are. You could have your standard, in this course you're going to learn, and then list 5 things, or you could have something that's much more creative. But somewhere in the process you have some sort of screen to indicate what the purpose of the course is. And then you're going to have your sections or subsections or modules or whatever you want to call them, and then they might have a similar structure. So you might have a welcome or intro to the section. You might have some sub-objectives. You're going to have your content, then you're going to have some sort of summary or assessment process through that. And then you're going to repeat that. If you have 3 sections, for example, you're going to repeat that process or that structure. And then you'll come up to the conclusion of your course, where you might have some sort of assessment, a summary, and then goodbye, see you later, here's what's going to happen after you're done with the course. So that's kind of a basic course structure. And one of the things you can do to create some consistency is to really kind of think through what those screens might look like. So you're building courses, you know that a course is going to have this kind of structure to it. It might not be the same for every course, but generically you have this type of structure. So you can already start to pre-build or think through the types of screens and what they would look like. So what would your welcome screen look like versus your summary screen, or what would your instruction screen look like versus your objective screens? So you can already begin to build that, because the goal here isn't so much that you're going to build earth-shattering e-learning. It's kind of to take that basic PowerPoint thing and get to something that looks more consistent, more like an e-learning course. So at this point, you can begin to build a template structure. This was just done up in PowerPoint real quick. But what you have is a structured screen layout, and you can modify that based on your organization's needs or based on the type of course that you're doing. But you can pre-build a lot of those things and then make those available to the course developers. And then you start to apply some basic graphic design concepts. So the consistency comes from understanding some basic graphic design. So the contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity, those are some basic concepts. And a great resource or a great book for learning some of this if you don't have those skills right now is the Robin Williams book, the Non-Designer's Design book. She goes through a lot of those basic ideas and with some good before and after examples. And so once you begin to do that, you could begin to build better looking screens, which is that, that first step. So here's an example. This is similar to a screen of a course that I'd seen a while back. And what was interesting was you have this title, and then you have these three sections or these three pieces of information. And what I found interesting with the screen was the way it was structured. It kind of looked like a pyramid. So you've got these colors, and the colors are indicating something. So are those different sections, or why are the colors there? Why is this structure a certain way? So I assumed that it was more like a pyramid or hierarchy, so somehow that information was related or stacked on top of each other. The reality is they were actually 3 points that were very similar, 3 sections of this course that were very similar. It's just that the designer of that screen had chosen to use these colors, and the shapes just happened to be different sizes. But when I looked at it, the way the screen was laid out, the way the shapes were designed, to me indicated some sort of hierarchy. And so I already assumed that the information was related that way, but the reality was that wasn't the case. So we reworked these. I had David Anderson, who works for me, rework some of these, and kind of these are some of the concepts we came up with. So if you look at this, again, using some basic graphic design concepts, you've got really good strong contrast. You could see where the title's at. Your eye can quickly scan the information. You can see there's three pieces of information here, but the way they're aligned and the proximity and the use of white space and all that, you can tell that they're more equal than they are built on top of each other, like you might think would be the case with a pyramid. And then here's another way to rework that. Again, this is kind of just some basic ideas, but the idea here is using some basic graphic design concepts, you're able to take this information that was kind of scattered and somewhat confusing and make it look a little more coherent and easier for the person to kind of understand or order that information visually. And then here's just another workup of that. So you can see there's a lot of ways you can go about designing this using the same types of concepts. Then the other step in that process, so we've got that building some sort of course structure, going to working with some graphic design concepts, some basic things that are going to help you rework your screens. And then the other is working with your subject matter experts. Because the reality is, especially if you're getting content that was developed by somebody else, they've invested a lot of time. They might have been using that content in the classroom for a few years and it's worked well for them. And now they're giving it to you and you're going to tell them, well, we're going to rework all this. And so you run into some friction. So working with them, getting them to understand the difference between an e-learning course and a face-to-face course, or just because they're using PowerPoint doesn't mean it has to look like PowerPoint, and running into some of those issues. So working with your subject matter experts is key. And so 3 quick tips. Develop some treatments, figure out some before and after examples. One of the things I always recommend is Kathy Moore. She has a couple of good examples. One is she has the dump the drone, and you can do a search for these. There's dump the drone, and then she's got another one, action mapping. And so what I tell people is go through those quick presentations she has, and then take your content and do a makeover applying some of those concepts. So you might take a before version of the course of what similar to what the client may have given you, and then rework it to have an after version, and then you can show them, this is what it looked like from a classroom perspective, but this is how we reworked it to be more e-learning specific. Then the other thing is to come up with some templates in some ways, like that course template structure, some things that get them to frame the content in a slightly different way, and to give them some guidance in how to structure some of that content. And then, develop some practical tips. I always tell people, come up with some simple style guides, like, we'll have one text for heading, one text for body, come up with some color schemes, some basic things to help guide their development and understanding. And one of the key things I do is if you can avoid it if you're using a rapid authoring tool that's based on PowerPoint. I don't let them know that I'm actually working with PowerPoint because the end product is actually going to be published and it's going to be converted to Flash. So they're going to get a Flash-based course. How you built the Flash-based course is irrelevant to them. So whether you built it in Flash or built it in PowerPoint really doesn't matter. So if they don't know that you're using PowerPoint, I wouldn't tell them. They're just going to get a course. If they want to give you PowerPoint files, that's fine. But I wouldn't tell them that you're converting these PowerPoint files to Flash. And if you can do that, you're not going to run into a lot of the hassles that you might run into if you tell them they're working with PowerPoint and they give you PowerPoint, and then a lot of times they're less flexible in wanting to change some of the stuff they've done. So that's kind of the essence of that first step. Is you're not going to get a perfect course out of this, but it's a good start, especially if you're just getting started and getting to a point where you're starting to think about some consistency and some basic graphic design and some style guide considerations. So I'll go ahead and open it up for a few questions, and then we can go into the next section.
Hello, Tom. This is Greg, and people have been asking questions. Would you like me just to feed them to you
Sure.
verbally so it might be quicker?
Yeah, we can take a few.
Okay. How do you influence your management on using more white space on e-learning, that it's better than a larger volume of colors and graphics?
That's a good question. It kind of goes to one of the points I was making about the Kathy Moore concept, and that if you can show them examples, it's better than if you try to explain it to them. So like that before-after example I showed when I started with the kind of purple-looking screen, it was all jumbled, and then going to something that was a little cleaner. So I think it's if you can show them some before and after makeovers, you're better off than trying to explain, the graphic design concepts. But everybody's had to take boring e-learning courses, and they've seen really bad stuff. You don't have to be a graphic designer to understand why something looks good and why it doesn't. But if you can show them some before-after versions, some treatments, I think that's a good place to start because they can see it for themselves.
Okay, thanks. Here's another question. What do you mean by, quote, consistency in the context? Learn consistency and how to use tools. Do you mean creating the template? Maybe some of this will be explained in later slides.
Yeah, that's it's like with the first step, it's the consistency is that you have a similar process to how you're working. I'm not a big fan of like the fascist approach to style guides. I've worked in organizations where they'll say this is the only way you can do something. It has to be this color. It has to do that. I don't like that approach, but I think you do need some sort of style guide, at least at the project level. So when we look back at those types of screens you might have in a course, a lot of people don't think about that. They just start building a course, and then they publish it, and then the next course they just start building that. So the consistency is developing a consistent production process, and that might mean developing a style guide that you apply to your e-learning courses. So I'm going to pick fonts for my course. I'm going to pick the color schemes for my course. I'm going to do some of those things prior to building my course because it's part of the way my production process is styled, and then I can apply that to the course rather than haphazardly saying, oh, I kind of like this font. Oh, this is nice clip art. Those are the things you don't want to do. So kind of starting with a production process in mind is kind of where you want to work with the consistency.
Okay. Tom, I don't want to jump in on this, but several people have asked, I believe it was Robin Williams' book, The Designer for Non-Designer. They want the title and the author. I thought it was the Robin Williams, but maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, that's correct. It's Robin Williams, and the book is called the Non-Designer's Design Book. And she's got a couple of different books. You can find it on Amazon, and then I believe, I'm not sure if it's in that link I provided earlier, but if not, I can add that to that after the conference. I'll add some of the book links if they're not in there. But that's a really good basic book, and it goes through all the core concepts that you would want for graphic design.
Here's what I think is a really good question. Is it possible to create quality e-learning course with only free tools?
Yeah, I think the tools are just tools. So it's really the quality in the course comes from, I think, two things. One is the instructional design, so how are you designing the learning experience? And then the other part of it is the quality in production and what you do with the tools that you have. Now, a lot of free tools, I used to do a lot of consulting with nonprofit groups. Free is not always free because they would save, $400 by not buying a tool, but they'd spend $2,000 in time trying to get the tool to do what they wanted to do or try to get the support. But if you have a tool and you know what you want to do with it, you know how to use the tool, then there should be no reason why the tool should prevent you from building quality courses.
Okay. And I'll give you as many as you want. You let me know when you want to move on.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on.
Okay.
And then we'll go to the next section then.
Very good.
So this next section then is, everybody's high-fiving. They've got all their content online. And somewhere in there somebody says, I might be wrong about this, but these all kind of look like PowerPoint. What can we do to make them look better? So making them look better is kind of a combination of a few things. So if we keep it real simple, it's like one is you've got the aesthetic, so actually making them look better is important. I know a lot of people think, you hear a lot of negatives, oh, that's just eye candy or that type of stuff. But I kind of see it like staging a house. You see those shows when they're about to sell the house, and the house is still the house, but they hire somebody to come in and they stage the house, and just changing up the way it looks and feels gives people a different perspective on the house. So I think part of what you're doing when you're building an e-learning course is actually just the production quality, making it look good, making it aesthetically pleasing, making it interesting for people to want to look at and engage them a little that way. And then the other part of it is actually designing the graphics and the elements on your screen that help communicate the message that you're trying to communicate and to fit the context of the course. So let's look at that a little. So in one sense, the visual design, it's about crafting meaning. So typically people, when they look at a course and they've done these eye tracking studies, they'll start up here in the corner and they kind of flow across the top of the screen, kind of like an F, and then they kind of come back down here, they flow across the middle, and then they kind of come back down. So they kind of have this F type of pattern when they're looking at the screen. So when you're building a screen, the idea is typically to start up here and you have your title, and you kind of help people guide their eye. Now I designed this screen a little different to kind of show that you can control some of the flow and movement of the eye and the movement of the content through the screen. So a couple of just simple things are like the visual cues. So I've got the 1, 2, 3. So because it says 1, 2, 3, people are more apt to just start at the 1 and kind of go up. The same thing with having a visual element like an arrow that kind of shows them the flow of the content. They kind of know where the starting point is. So this is a simple example of this, but it kind of shows that there's nothing on your screen that's there by accident. Everything there, it's not like you get up, go get a cup of coffee and come back and all of a sudden there's some clip art on your screen, right? It's there because you placed it there. So you have to choose what you're going to put on the screen, and there has to be a reason why it's there. So it shouldn't be there on accident. Here's a simple exercise. Normally I would do this in a class, but if you just think about it real quick, so if you were going to design a Western movie poster, what would that movie poster look like? And normally in a classroom environment, people will say, well, it's going to be brown, horses, cowboy hats, dusty. You might have kind of a strong serifed Western looking fonts, things like that. And what's interesting is I went and did a search on Google for Western movie posters, and sure enough, all the Western movie posters kind of had a similar look and feel. And the reason is you kind of have this visual voice that communicates to you what something should look like. And that's really what you want to do when you're building your e-learning course. You want to create a context to the course visually that kind of allows that visual voice to speak to the learner. And so you don't want to, I always say it's more like Family Feud, because Family Feud was the game where it was about finding the most common answer and not the most clever answer. And it's the same thing when you're designing your courses. It's less about being really clever and creative that way and more about what's common, what are the expectations the person has when they're looking at this. So if I'm going to design a course around operating room technology, there's going to be a certain look to it. What are my characters going to look like? They're probably going to be wearing, scrubs or something like that, or holding scalpels and things like that. They're not going to be wearing hockey masks and a chainsaw, right? They're going to look like they belong in an operating room. What are the colors going to look like? They're going to look sterile. They're going to look clean, that type of thing. So you want to kind of tap into that. So here's a simple exercise that'll help you do this. We actually do this as an exercise, and at the end I'll give you a link to where you can download this and you can practice this on your own. So we did this quick mock-up. So this is the whole rainforest. This might be typical of what you'd get, from somebody. And then we'll say these different bullet points really should be sections that you click on for your course. So we want to rework this using kind of a visual mind mapping process. And we want to get something that looks a little more like an e-learning product where you have clickable sections and it looks more immersive in a sense than this course right here or this screen. So how do we get to a visual look like this? So it's really actually pretty simple. So David Anderson, who works with the Articulate community team, he developed kind of a mind mapping process. And when you think of what's on your course, you're going to have on that screen certain elements. So you've got colors. You're going to have different things on the screen like trees or people or cars, those types of things. You're going to have your fonts or your typography, and then you're going to have characters in there. And then you've got to figure out, well, what do those things need to look like? I know I'm going to have colors in my course. Well, what colors should be there? I know I'm going to have elements or screen elements. What elements should be there? I'm going to have fonts. I'm going to use a font. What type of font should I use for this course? And I'm going to have characters or people. What are those going to be? And so there are some ways you can kind of figure that out going through this mind map, and then he uses for inspiration. If you're kind of stuck, there's different things you can do for inspiration. So you can actually download all this and kind of play around with these worksheets if you want to. So we'll go through this real quick. So with the whole rainforest, we've got this flow chart. So we're going to look at, okay, what type of elements would we have on the screen? And so we might have wood grain, paper textures, leaves, earthy stuff, anything that kind of looks like a rainforest, right? So it doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong. So you kind of just brainstorm some things. What would the fonts look like? At this point, you don't really need to know the names of fonts. You just need to know kind of what they would look like. Maybe they look like a tree. They look organic. One of the nice things is a lot of those font sites that you go to, you can type in organic, and it'll give you organic-like fonts. Or I'm looking for casual, it'll give you casual fonts. Or office, it'll give you office-looking fonts. So a lot of those font sites will help you find that. And then what are the people in the rainforest? What are the people going to look like? They're going to be hunched over, hairy, chasing other people through the woods. Maybe they don't look like that, but there's a certain look that people in the rainforest have, right? So you're going to kind of label the types of people you're going to find. In this case, he kind of broke it out. You have tourists, you have employees, what would those people look like, that type of stuff. And then what are some cultural references or things that could inspire some ideas, like where do you see rainforests? Apparently Robin Hood and Braveheart are in the rainforest. But so what would, what are some movies or things that kind of might inspire some thinking? And then different analogies or other industries that you could think about. You've got magazines, publications, all that type of stuff, related industries, and then, color schemes. So you can kind of think through some of that. And then you just pencil that out real quick. It kind of helps you visually start thinking about your course. And then you'd go just do a Google search and start typing in searches for some of these things and copy and paste the pictures. At this point, you just kind of want some ideas. Then you can see we're starting to put things together. And then we kind of fill all this stuff in with some pictures. And then we kind of come up with a pretty nice palette that we could begin to look at our course or use to look at our course. David tells a really neat story about one time working with a customer And he had kind of done this, and he shows this to the customer, and the customer says, you know, your people are too American or too Western. They really aren't the type of people we want in the course, which really is kind of a neat thing to think about, that if you did something like this and you presented it to your customer, it's a great way to get them to dump what that visual voice is telling them. So they have a mental picture of what their course should look like. They might not have been able to adequately share that with you. So if you go through a mind mapping process like this, before you invest a lot of time building up screenshots and mock-ups, you can kind of go through them with this, and then they could say, you know, yeah, this is what I was thinking. These are the colors. These are the types of elements. Or maybe we want less rainforest. We want more savanna or something like that. So doing this is a good way to get you to start thinking about the visual elements in your course. Is a great way to interact with your client. And then you end up with something that kind of looks like this. So when we look at the PowerPoint version of this real fast, we've got the screen. What we did is we just took out the background and put a more rainforesty background in there to kind of make it a little bit more immersive look, a more of an immersive visual experience. Of course, the background's busy, so it's hard to see any type of text on there. So we'll put a wood panel type shape down here, again kind of going with the wood organic theme. This will be where we have our buttons. Then we've got like a white area that allows us to put some other elements on there that you can actually see. That's somewhat transparent, so you get a little bit of texture from the background, but you don't get the busyness of the background in there. And then we take the text out. We're going to replace it with that organic font that we found, and so we can see that's kind of organic there. And then we've got the different types of fonts. So we've got a title font, and then we have a body font. You can kind of see we just bring in these other elements. Get rid of that blocky tree, and then we'll replace the blocky tree with a transparent or white, a cropped tree, so it's transparent. It sits on the background better. And then what we'll do is we put some characters in there, and then we've got our buttons, and everything looks fine. So that's kind of the basic structure for the visual design. And then when we get to, I'm getting a message here that the screen's not showing. Are you guys able to see the screens, Greg?
I can see your screen, the big leaf maple.
Okay. Okay, yeah, it was, I got some message saying the screen wasn't there. All right, so as you can see now, you have a nice clean screen that looks a lot better than that basic PowerPoint screen that we were looking at. And then here's a simple, a quick example. Again, this was built in QuizMaker, but you've got this kind of generic quiz look, right? And it's, you're supposed to identify the masterpiece in this art museum piece. Well, David reworked that using his visual mind map, and now you get something like this. Still built in QuizMaker, so the same tool, but because he applied that visual mind mapping technique, it kind of gave him some ideas about how to approach the example in a different way. And so you could be here, which is kind of like, same information, or you can be here. It's much more visually dynamic and probably more memorable for the person who is going to go through the course. So we've got some practice assets. You can find the link here. It's bit.ly and then eLearn-heroes. If you go to the Articulate Learning community or the user community, we have we have a practice course that link will take you to. And in the second section, we actually go through that whole visual mind mapping process. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, you can do that. We have all the files and everything you can download and play around with that. And I'll make sure that link's also available on the link that I shared earlier. So that's basically it for that second section. So you're getting to the point where you've kind of gone from that basic process to now let's really create the right look and feel for our courses, and how do we do that? And the visual mind mapping is a simple way to get you started in that direction, to create something that looks better. And it kind of goes back to that question somebody asked earlier about the white space. If you took your client, if you said we're starting with a blank slate, now let's go through this visual mind mapping exercise, It only takes a few minutes to go through that, and all of a sudden now they're not thinking about the busyness of the screen. They're actually starting to assemble the things that they need to put on that screen, and you're able to communicate better with them about some of those graphic design considerations. So we can open it up again for a few more questions.
Okay, Tom, this is Greg. We've got a lot of questions that are coming in, and here's one. What are creative ways to present objectives?
A couple of them that just come off the top of my head. One is you could just say, here's your course, here are your objectives. It's not really that creative, but what's funny is a lot of times e-learning people will say, I want to be more creative about things, and this is boring, and it probably isn't the most dynamic way to do it, but people who aren't building e-learning courses don't really say, oh, I don't like this objective screen because it's telling me the 3 things I'm going to learn. It's usually e-learning people who don't like that. So I think having a clear presentation of objectives isn't bad, but if you want to be a little bit more creative, there are things you can do. So Michael Allen has a good example on one of his courses he showed a few years ago where they were doing some sort of FAA training, and they wanted to get away from that typical objective screen. So they actually started off with, I think they were training flight attendants that had to go through a certain type of safety process. And they started off with this door beeping, and the plane was going to crash because the person didn't do the right procedure or something. So all of a sudden, this kind of, if you're a flight attendant going through this, it kind of takes what you're doing and might be a mundane task and really frames it in a way that, if you don't learn this task right, you possibly can hurt people. So all of a sudden, the objective is you need to learn this task so people don't die. You could do things where you could pre-test them or throw a scenario or a case study out there to get them to think through something that essentially might present some gaps in their understanding. So it gives them an awareness of something they might not know, which again motivates them to say, well, I want to know this, or I want to fill this gap. So there's some things like that that you can do if you want to get away from that basic objective screen. But I wouldn't dismiss the objective screen, because sometimes I've been in courses where I've seen something really creative, but I'm thinking, just give me the 3 points. What are the 3 things you want to tell me, rather than making me sit through a 5-minute scenario to give me my objectives. So I wouldn't dismiss that, although it might not be the most creative thing to do.
Okay, here's another question. How do you feel, is it a good idea to start your course with some sort of hook to capture the learner's attention and motivate them to continue with the course?
Well, you really don't want to capture the learner's attention, and that's one of the secrets to successful e-learning. No, actually it's a good idea. You know what? It's really all about creating content that's relevant to the learner. I mean, that's how you're going to capture their attention. So how does this course relate to them? So what's the hook where you can get them to say, yeah, I need to know this, or this is something that interests me. I'm motivated to dig a little deeper in this course. So it's important, I think, to find that, and then find a way to present that to the learner right away to get them engaged in the content. The last thing you want to do is start with 20 bureaucratic-looking screens, and that's really one of the reasons why that kind of standard objectives probably is a challenge for some people. Is you go through screen after screen of information, and you're kind of losing the learner rather than finding a way to engage them right away. That's where I think those places, the courses I've seen where they kind of throw the learner into some sort of situation, or they do something to get them engaged right away and to frame it in a way that's relevant to them, is a good hook to get them continuing in the course and thinking about what the course is presenting.
Okay, I'm going to take the liberty to combine a couple of questions here.
Right.
But basically I talk about how do we ensure that our slides are appealing to folks taking the training while staying within limits of branding guidelines for the organization, and how do you balance the nice artistic look without looking too crafty and being professional if we are a more traditional organization?
Yeah, that's really one of the challenges with companies. A lot of times there'll be these style considerations that the e-learning people really aren't invited to, or the organization has no interest in changing their style guides. Now, a couple of things you could do. One is, like I was saying earlier, if you went through the dump the drone content or the action mapping and you took a course that might have been typical in your organization and you reworked it and kind of took those principles, applied it to your own course, you have some treatments where you can say this is how we really should be designing e-learning versus following these more rigid style guides. The other thing is there's no reason why you can't have a corporate branded style guide that's e-learning specific. I always joke around and say, every company I go to, there's some marketing or communications group that has presented all these style guide limitations, right? This is how you use the logo. You have to measure it 1/2 inch from here. You have to use these colors. And nobody's ever called me up and said, hey, Tom, you want to come to our style guide meeting? We're coming up with some ideas. So if somebody gives you these things and you're kind of stuck using them. So I figure, well, hey, I'm the e-learning person. You've hired me to build e-learning. I'm going to come up with my own e-learning style guides. And when I build e-learning for the organization, we're going to use these style guides. And my guess is most people won't push back on that in the same way you don't typically push back on the communications group. So come up with a consistent style guide that works for the way you would do e-learning courses. And then I think that's one way to move in that direction. And then the other thing is just always remember who pays you. So if they want to pay you and this is what they want, then if you kind of sometimes have to live with what the organization wants.
Okay, thanks, Tom. We have about 3.5 minutes left. Here's another good course. How do you begin building a course when you are not given any materials? You meet with a SME and get all the information you need, but there are no slides, no manuals, or anything for you to build off of. How would you go about this?
Well, assuming you have some understanding of how to build a course, I think if you don't know, a good way to start is, I would say, go to Microsoft. If you do a search of Office Online there on their online site, there's all sorts of training-based templates. So if you're asking a question like that, to me implies that you're kind of getting started. So at that point, kind of goes back to that first step in the process that we were talking about. Thinking about kind of the screen structure, thinking about basic things like I have an objective and I'm going to present the information or the activities for the person to learn the information and practice it, and then I'm going to have some way to assess that they met those objectives. So even if it's a real simple screen that says, in this section you're going to learn these 3 things, and then at the end you have a simple quiz that kind of tries to touch on the 3 things that they should have learned. That's a good basic starting point. But if you go to the Microsoft Office Online and you do a search for PowerPoint training templates, you'll find all sorts of good starter templates that even if you're not using PowerPoint, they're still good kind of fill-in form type templates that are going to help you structure your content. It's really about understanding your objectives, figuring out how you're going to meet them, and then kind of putting the content in that perspective, and then working through the learner element, what's relevant, how to create courses that are learner-centric, and then all of those considerations and the types of activities to kind of get them to practice using the information.
Okay, Tom, I think we have time for, well, we've got about a minute left. So here's a question.
Right.
Is there a creative way to create an e-learning course where the course just consists of many steps for various processes, where it's not just information they're obtaining, but specific steps?
Yeah, I think the thing is to get them, if there's specific steps, is the question is how do you get the learners to do those steps and then give them feedback. So you could give them the information, which again I wouldn't dismiss, because a lot of times It's from an e-learning training perspective, we can get a little clever and come up with these really cool scenarios and interactive elements, but the person going through it, they've got their own level of understanding, and if they kind of understand some of this, they might say, give me the information and let me leave versus keeping me captive in some fancy interactive scenario or some instruction that way. But I think the thing is, create it, I like to call it, throw them in the pool. So instead of giving them the information, give them a scenario where they need to use the information. So we did a training one time for workplace injuries, and my point to my client at the time was people don't come to work and read policy manuals, so we don't need to do policy training. Nobody goes to the cubicle, gets a cup of coffee, then pulls all the company's policies and starts reading them. What they do is they just do their work, and then something happens, and the company hopes that they're compliant with the policies. But a lot of times you don't know until they actually start making decisions. So if that's the case in real life, why not just create the training that way? Give them some situations and let them start making decisions, let them pull the information they need to make the decisions, and kind of guide them through that process, and then give them the feedback to do that. And the same thing if you're doing step-by-step instruction. So instead of giving them the steps, just give them something to do that would require them knowing the steps, and if they don't know, give them the cues or the type of feedback they need to give them the information so they can make the right decisions.
Thanks, Tom. Here's another good question. What are the essential pieces an organization should consider before embarking on an e-learning development project? That is, converting 20 class-based courses into e-learning.
I think there's a lot that goes into that. I think at a really high level, you have to figure out how you're going to convert them. Have a budget for that. What applications or process are you going to use to do that? You can do something simple, using a rapid authoring tool, or you could do something much more complex, custom programming in Flash or something like that. So it's really a matter of figuring out the tools and all of that. And then the management of it. So how do you deliver it? How do people find it? How do they take it? How do you score it? How do you track it? Those types of things. And then I would say what I always find interesting is organizations will go out and buy a tool to do the authoring of the course, but they never give a person a budget to actually build courses. So it's like we're going to buy a tool, you're going to start building courses, but you're not going to get access to a graphic designer, you're not going to get access to stock images, we're not going to give you a budget to buy stuff from places like iStock.com. So we're going to give you these tools, and you're just going to have to fend for yourself after that. So I think, to me, that's a big gap in the organization, that they don't provide the resources to actually build good courses and those things that go with building courses.
Thanks, Tom. Here's another good question. Are you in favor of using knowledge checks throughout the course and then have one tracked final SCORM test at the end?
I'm not in favor of the kind of the model some people use where they do 5 slides and then 3 questions, 5 slides, 3 questions, that type of thing. But I think the course is really about the learning. So I prefer a structure where they're actually learning through it and you're giving them feedback. You don't really need an assessment necessarily. I mean, a lot of organizations want that, but from the learning process, you don't need that. You need to give them an environment to get information, practice using it, and getting them the feedback they need to continue learning and making the modifications. So having some knowledge checks or some ways to test their understanding of the information that you're giving them is good, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that 7 slides and a quiz question type of structure. All right, we should probably go through. I've got just a few minutes to go through this next section. So we'll
go right ahead, Tom.
All right, so a lot of those questions kind of dealt with, really how to make better courses, and kind of it's that last section of it. And so making them interactive. And I would say that making them interactive, to me, a large part of it is how do you make them learner-centric. So the challenge a lot of organizations have is that they have information, and the idea is we put the information, we package it, we put it online, we put it in front of people, and they're going to learn. And that's really not the case. I kind of see a e-learning course kind of like a textbook. So having some information is good. So I'm not as big on every course having to be highly interactive. It's just information, just like a textbook would be. Some textbooks you read, you reflect on. Some of them are just resources that you can reference, and some of them have worksheets and different things in there. So e-learning courses like that as well. So some of them present information, some of them are more like reference pieces, some of them are more like marketing pieces, and then some have activities and different type of interactions that way. But it's really about making them relevant and learner-centric, so that the person who's actually going through the course gets the most out of it. So one of the challenges, though, is a lot of people haven't enrolled in the University of Maryland's Baltimore County's program, so they haven't learned about instructional design. So how do you get to a point where you can build instructionally sound or interactive courses without being a trained instructional designer, which is where a lot of people struggle? So one idea, I saw this video a while back where they made these inflatable concrete houses or shelters, and you inflated them like they were bounce-arounds, like the kids' bounce-arounds, and then you wet them down, and there's like a cement fabric, and then after 24 hours you went from like this inflatable unit to a concrete shelter. And so what's interesting is an engineer designed it, but an engineer didn't set it up. So the person who set it up, they just could be anybody who could inflate it and water it. So I was thinking, why couldn't you really do that with instructional design? Why can't you create these little inflatable shelters, so to speak, that are good temporary stopgap measures to help people who don't have the instructional design background to create more interactive content? So I kind of been playing around with these, what I call rapid ID models, and I kind of see them like Lego pieces where you can kind of put them together the way you want to. So I won't go into detail on the models, but I have some of that. I'll be writing about more on the blog, and then we've got a few examples on some of the links I'll show you. But one of them we have is called an RSI, and the idea is that you create relevant situations and you make them interactive. And essentially the way it's structured is, instead of just the information dumping, you kind of frame everything with questions before, and then they make choices. So they're actually, you give them some viable choices, so that instead of saying here's what the information is, you say what would you think the right thing is here, and then you give them some choices to kind of think through, and then make a choice, and then you give them some feedback. So it's a simple model, but it's a great way to take what would normally be an information dump to something, I like to say, something better. So it's a little bit more interactive, a little bit more engaging, and essentially you're framing it in a way that's relevant to the learners. Another one we have is, I call it Gilligan, the I skipper, because you always say I skipper. But it's an information interaction. This model works great because a lot of clients don't want to get rid of information. So how do you present all the information the client wants and still have some interactivity? So why not just do 2 tracks? So one track you have all the information, another track you can make interactive. And this is a good example of how this works in the real world. And you can see it on the blog if you do a search for the Christian AIDS demo that I did. And I'll make sure that that link is on the site as well. But when Dave and I were meeting with our client, we only had a few minutes, we only had a few days to work on the course, and we had about 30 or 40 Word documents, and that was it. So we had to get something out pretty quickly, and so we said, well, let's use the Gilligan. So we're going to use the information interaction model, and for the interactive part, we'll use RSI. So now you can kind of see the Lego component. And so we were able to present on one side all the information the learner needed or the client wanted to give to the learners. On the other side, we can give them frame it in a slightly different way where we can use something that's a little bit more engaging, a little bit more interactive. But again, it wasn't like an award-winning, or actually this course we did win an award, but the process isn't like the Oscar quality e-learning course, but it is definitely a lot better than a linear, standard kind of click and read type course. And it's a model that, because we pre-thought through the models, we were able to quickly brainstorm and come up with a structure. Then another one I have is called the usual suspects, and the idea here is that you get the learners, you present some situation, you get them to sort, to search for information, to sort the information, and then to begin doing something else. I was trying to come up with 3 S's: search, sort, and then I guess suggest. So they're suggesting a solution, or I guess search, sort, and solution. So you get them to kind of think through that, and it could work for all sorts of environments. Again, I'll be presenting more about this on the blog, but the main idea here is that you can pre-build some interactive elements that you can quickly bring into your courses that you can apply. So like the usual suspects model could be applied to all sorts of products or different types of training and information, because essentially you're getting them to look at what's there, sort them, so they're kind of having to have some reason why they're sorting them a certain way. And they collect some more information, and then they make some decisions. When you think of like a crime drama, there's a crime is committed, you are going to grab your suspects, so you figure out why are they suspects, you grab your suspects, you interview the suspect, you collect more information, then you make a decision, is this person guilty or not, and if not, let's go to the next suspect. So that's kind of the framework for that model. The main thing, though, is it's a templated way to get away from your standard templates and that click and read type linear structure. So now the thing was, we had 4 tips. So the last tip is take advantage of the user community. You know, I work with the Articulate user community, so I can speak from that perspective. But the user community is where you're going to get your best help. So on the Articulate side, and this is the link here, the eLearn-Heroes is the link to these courses and the demo assets. You can download everything. You can learn more about that RSI model. You can learn more about the visual mind mapping. And then this is the Articulate community in general. But the community, you know, companies like Articulate, we're going to build software. The software has features, and it does stuff. But it's not until users actually start doing things that they figure out what to do with the software. So your best tips are going to come from other users. Most of the people I work with work by themselves or in small teams, and they don't really have a lot of opportunity to brainstorm or get tips and tricks from people that they work with. So the user community of whatever software you're using is a great place to go to get the help that you need. And if you're not an Articulate customer, you're more than welcome to go in there and use our resources and download the free tools and all that stuff that we make available. So not being an Articulate customer shouldn't hinder you, but take advantage of the user community and all the free resources and those things that are already out there available to you. So in conclusion, start with the basics. Don't try to build the world's best e-learning course if you're just getting started. Come up with some good template structures and some things to work with your subject matter experts, and then start working on creating the right look and feel for your courses, and then look at what you can do to make them interactive. And then you'll be on the road to building really good e-learning courses. And that's basically it.
Tom, this is Greg. Thank you very much. That was great. We're getting a lot of positive comments come through right now. So what I'm going to do is take control back of the screen from you, if that's okay.
All right. Yep.
And I'm going to... Okay, well, that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you very much for attending. Most of all, I want to thank you for asking great questions. It's your contributions and your feedback that really help us take these webinars to the next level. Please complete our webinar evaluation. It's only about 8 items, so it's not going to be a killer and shouldn't take you long to complete. These evaluations do give us important feedback and help us to plan and improve future webinars. This is Greg Williams for the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. We hope to see you at our next webinar, and we hope to see you soon. We will make the recording and the slides available to you. Goodbye for now.